The Evil Within is a video game that was released in 2014 to quite a bit of hype from fans of the survival horror genre. For starters, the game was to be published by one of the most accredited publishers in the current gaming scene, Bethesda Studios. A studio with several massive franchises under their belt such as Doom, Fallout, and of course the Elder Scrolls series. But even more exciting than that was the prospect of one of the most recognizable names in gaming being attached to the project. Shinji Mikami, a man who, if you don't know by name, you would know by his work, would be taking the game director's chair on the project. Of course, this idea excited a lot of horror lovers out there. To have a new game directed by the same man who had directed games like the original Resident Evil, a game which helped kickstart the whole survival horror genre, the 2002 Resident Evil remake, a game still credited as one of the best of the genre, and most importantly to the Evil Within, Resident Evil 4, one of the most beloved games of all time, which is still influencing third-person shooters to this day. The game began its development in late 2010 under the codename Project Zui, and was the first title being worked on by the Mikami-founded game development studio Tango Gameworks. Mikami envisioned the game as a true return to survival horror, claiming that, in his opinion, the genre had become much too action-oriented.
Originally, it was all about survival horror, but as they made sequels, it went more towards action games. This time, I want to create a real survival horror for players who love that genre.
So he sought to create a game that attempted to return to the genre's roots, providing the player with less ammo, confined spaces to work with, and enemies so powerful that it will require the player to often flee from combat. Was Mikami's attempt to reinvigorate the genre successful? Sort of. Starting first with the idea of gameplay taking place in confined spaces, The Evil Within has a lot of narrow hallways and cramped corridors that Sebastian will have to maneuver through in order to reach his objective. However, that's not to say that every location is strictly a linear path to the next area. The game does a good job of juggling between open environments with a lot of enemies and more cramped environments with more tense encounters. The game does seem to make a concerted effort to craft enclosed areas that your character is to traverse, and even though personally it's not something that I would have noticed outside of this comment from Mikami, it is something that you can see if you look at the game in that lens. Fights like this one with the Keeper, where you're in close quarters with a monster as he stalks you, or probably the most claustrophobic encounter of them all, the fight in the burning building with Joseph, where he's to open the door while you're stuck dealing with hordes of Haunted.
Let's go!
And while not all areas are narrow corridors by any means, the game does still have its fair share. And even though some of these locations may be enclosed, there's still enough there to explore. Which leads us into the next target that Mikami wanted to hit in providing the player with less ammo. The Evil Within toys with the idea of conservation quite a bit. Sure, there's a lot of ammunition to be found, however, if you're not actively searching it out, then it is entirely possible that you could hit a dead end where you don't quite have the items needed to progress through a boss fight. Is this something that I think happened to most people? Probably not. But in theory, it does seem plausible. To combat that, the developers added locker keys, which can give you ammunition for various guns in the game by going to the safe house. Again, it's not a feature that you'll probably need, considering exploration will reward you with more than enough to get by, but it is still there. There's also the ability to craft your own ammo for the Agony crossbow with trap parts found in the world. Again, often rewarded to you through exploration and disarming traps that you find, which means that even if you were very low on ammo, you never really have to be. There are several avenues that you can take to get what you need to overcome a difficult boss or area. Does this mean that Mikami's goal was unmet? It depends on how limiting he meant. Personally, I'd say the ammo in this game is a medium between Resident Evil 1 and Resident Evil 4. You don't get as much ammo as you would in a game like Resident Evil 4, but you get more than you would in a game like Resident Evil 1. However, unlike Resident Evil 1, at no time will you be so limited that you feel like it's more beneficial to run from enemies rather than kill them. Which leads us into the final target that Mikami wanted to hit. Enemies so powerful that it will require the player to often flee from combat. This seems to be a major focus of development that I actually never even considered until I saw this interview. If you look at a lot of the boss enemies of The Evil Within, Sebastian does a lot of evasion. The entire first chapter sets up the sadist as this hulking monster that you can't really kill, seeing as he'll one-hit kill you if he manages to get his hands on you. The chapter even makes a point to show you how to hide and evade from combat from enemies by hiding in lockers or drawing attention away through the use of bottles. However, after this chapter, these tactics will become all but irrelevant, as I don't recall ever using a locker for the entirety of the rest of the game. Sure, the option was there, but enemies are not difficult enough to warrant its use. Instead, you'll kill an enemy, not with your gun, but instead with stealth. Standard enemies are very easy to take down with a little bit of patience. The game again attempts to instill this idea of sometimes it's better to run from enemies at the end of Chapter 2, but after this point, running from standard enemies is not something that you'll do all that often, if at all. Instead, the idea transitions to the bosses of the game. Bosses in this game are quite frequent, and they'll pop up again and again, taunting you until you finally have a chance to put them down. Take Reborn Laura, for example. The first encounter that you have with her, you're meant to run away. Any attempt at combat will be met with a swift death in your first playthrough, and so you have to flee the area. It's not until the next encounter with her that you learn of a method of dealing with her.
Fire seems to work.
Most bosses in the game function like this. You're introduced to them, they make you wonder about how you're going to deal with them, and then you deal with them. Some of them you never even truly find a way to kill. You can't really kill the Keeper. Laura loses her arms, but does she really die? Did that tunnel kill Heresy? Ruvik escapes the system. Sadist seems to have infinite lives, and the Quell? Well, I think he might be dead, but most other enemies can't really be dealt with in the game. However, even though through reflection you can see this, it's not something that I really thought about during the game. None of these enemies really pose a looming threat that made me fear another encounter with them. At best, they created some sense of mystery as to what would be coming in the future. So was Mikami true to what he said about the game? Personally, I think he was. He attempted it to moderate success. In my opinion, the game is attempting to reignite the things that gamers loved about classic survival horror games, but in a more accessible playstyle of the modern action horror games. However, the biggest misstep for them, if that was indeed their intent, was in the combat. Killing an enemy in a game like Resident Evil 1 is a luxury. At no point during my first playthrough of that game was I ready for anything that was ahead of me. I snuck through it by the skin of my teeth, and in the end, the idea of not knowing if I could face what was around the corner in and of itself was a thrill for me. However, in The Evil Within, combat is a necessity. Running from enemies, while it could be done, is reserved for stipulation playthroughs or challenges. And even if you did attempt to avoid every non-necessary conflict, you're still going to have to deal with enemies at some point, much more so than in a game like Resident Evil 1. But that's enough for me. What do you guys think? Do you think that Mikami was true to what he said prior to the release of the game? Is there something that I'd missed or didn't consider in my analysis? Let me know what you guys think in the comment section down below, and if you enjoyed the video, then please be sure to leave a like as it really helps me out, and if you enjoyed, feel free to subscribe for more content like this in the future. That all being said, thank you all for watching, and I hope to see you in the next video.